Well, hi there, this is Scott Duffy from GetCloudSkills.com. And in today's video, I want to talk about the Microsoft Certification Exam test taking tips. Now, this is updated for the latest Microsoft certification exams. Recently, I was on the Microsoft website looking at my transcript, and you can see it says I've taken 32 certification tests in my time working with Microsoft. Obviously, there's more when you take other vendors into account. And so over the course of my career, I've taken all these exams and I've come with a strategy. And in this video, I want to tell you what my strategy is for taking Microsoft certification exams. Now, this video is going to be focused on those associate and expert level exams. The fundamental exams, the 900 series exams, they're a different breed of exam. The questions are a lot simpler. Sometimes they're true or false. They are more trivial, to be frank. And so I'm talking more about the actual associate and expert level exams. And this is my experience and my tips for taking those. So last week I sat down and took, believe it or not, the AZ 104 exam, Azure Associate Administrator. And I've been certified as an Azure Administrator for many, many years now, but I just keep renewing the certification. And so over time, Microsoft has changed the exam code a few times. So I took the Azure Administrator exam again, even though I didn't have to. And this is my experience. So first of all, your mileage may vary. That means that you are going to see a different exam than I see. Not only does time pass and Microsoft changes the exam, but even two people taking the same exam on the same day are going to see different types of questions, maybe even a different number of questions. Microsoft does not publish the number of questions on each exam, but they do publish the time. So as you can see, for my exam, the AZ 104 exam I took last week, I had 50 questions over 100 minutes. Microsoft does publish the times. So you can see the fundamentals exam only takes 45 minutes to complete. But the associate and expert role-based exams that don't have labs are given 100 minutes. And if they do have labs, they're given 120 minutes. And of course, the Microsoft Office exams are shorter than that. So typically, you're going to get 100 minutes to take this test, and you may have more or less around 50 questions. So out of those 50 questions that I had, I'll break them down into most of them, like 38 out of 50, were multiple choice questions and they were reviewable. So at the end of the set of 38, I was given a chance to go back and review them before moving on. Once you move on from a section, you are unable to come back to it. So you do all these questions and then you can have a chance to review them, and then you're moving on to the next section. Now, there were also 6 multiple choice questions that were not reviewable. So it's exactly as it sounds. They ask you, and as soon as you hit next, there's no way to get back to that screen. These are one and done questions. Typically, these types of questions have all the same question format, and it's just some variety in the answer. And so that's why they make sure that you don't go back, because these are unique types of questions compared to the first 38. Now, my exam had a case study, and it was one case study only, and there were 6 questions associated with that. That happens in the last section, and so you have your multiple choice, you have your non-reviewable multiple choice, and then you have the case study as effectively 3 separate sections. Now, I took the exam from home. These days, that's a very popular option. You can also go to an exam center, as you used to be able to do, and take it at someone else's computer. So let's talk about some of the new features, the innovations Microsoft has made. And the first one I'll talk about is the concept of unscheduled breaks. So this was introduced in the last few months, and that's the ability to pause the exam. That literally lets you sit up, get up from your desk, go to the a bathroom if you need to, go answer the door if you need to, or speak to your spouse or whoever, whatever task you have to do, and then be able to come back to the exam and pick it up from there. Now, that's not without consequence. Once you have paused the exam, the time continues to tick. So if you have that 100 minutes to finish the exam, but you step away from your computer for 5 minutes, well, then you only have 95 minutes to do the whole exam. So don't just leave your computer for too long. And once you hit that pause, then you are no longer able to review any questions. So you cannot go back to, let's say you've done 10 questions and then you need to pause. Those 10 questions are not reviewable once you come back. Now, maybe you can review the questions before hitting pause. I haven't actually hit the unscheduled break feature. I might test it next time, but you are basically not going to be able to see them ever again. All right, and here's how it looks. So there's this pause, these two vertical lines that make the pause symbol, and it says take a break. Now, the next new feature is an MS Learn button. Now, people are excited about this. I think it's a positive feature. There is a button that you click that will open up the Microsoft Learn website, or what used to be called Microsoft Docs, and it opens it as a split screen. And so you'll have the exam on one side and the MS Learn website on the other. You can search, and you'll be able to find all of the documentation, all of the training, any of the other pages that live in the MS Learn site. Now, any materials that are not hosted on MS Learn, such as a GitHub repository, is not viewable from your exam. And again, you're not given any extra time for this, and the exam time does continue to click down. So here's how that looks. You have this MS Learn logo at the bottom next to the pause button, and it says Microsoft Learn. And when you click it, a new window opens side by side, and it's a search box, and you can view the documentation, look at the training, look at the forums or whatever. But again, you can't go off of the MS Learn site. I'll talk about that later in this video. So these are my tips for taking this exam. Now, one thing I do always when I take an exam from home is I always reboot my computer just before installing the exam software. So you go to Pearson VUE, you download an exe that will allow you to run the exam, but then you reboot your computer, unplug any second monitors, physically turn them away so that they're not in your line of sight. I turned on my computer speakers because if there's any noise or sound, I want to be able to hear it, and you won't be able to wear speakers on your ears. I cleaned out my desk so that there's nothing on the desk at all. And most importantly, and the more difficult of it, is to stop all of the running background processes in Windows. So all of your antivirus, anti-malware, all of those things in the tray, Dropbox, Google Drive, even my keyboard and mouse application runs in the tray. I had to kill that. Adobe Cloud has an updater, any kind of VPN, even if it's not active, the backup software, everything that runs in the background, basically kill as much as you can. And that's probably the most difficult part for somebody who's not a Windows expert, let's say. All right, so let's say you go ahead and you've done that and you launch the exam. Everything's great. You've done your ID and it's all been approved. The first screen that comes up is a welcome screen, and I would pay attention to that. Don't just skip past the welcome screen. It says hello and your name. It'll tell you how many questions. Well, first it'll tell you what exam this is. Make sure it's correct. It'll tell you how many questions there are, how many minutes you have, which you already know, and how many case studies are on this exam. Now, there is no other place in the exam that will tell you how many questions there are in total or how many case studies. So if you skip this screen, you can't come back to it, and that information is just not located anywhere. So again, for me, the case study was at the end. It was the last section, And I think that's probably pretty standard because it makes sense to go there. The trick is, though, it's up to you to leave enough time to do the case study, because the total number of minutes, which in our case is 100, is displayed on screen, and there's no additional time to do the case study. So you need to allocate how much time there is for the multiple choice and how much time you're going to leave for the case study, and it's up to you to track that. Now, my suggestion, this is something that I've always done, is I try to pace myself. And so I will do the math. There's even a calculator button in the exam. I will do the math to work out how many minutes I have per question. So in my case, I had 50 questions, 100 minutes. That's 2 minutes a question. Then I stepped that back a little bit. So I want to leave some time at the end to be able to review all of these mark for review items. And so I will subtract 30 seconds from each question. So not 2 minutes per question, but 90 seconds or a minute and a half per question. So that's the pace. So you want to pace yourself and try to stick within that 90-second limit. Eminem will call it a marathoner's pace. So if you find yourself getting stuck on a question for more than, let's say, 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes, I would just pick an answer, whatever's in your head, pick it, mark for review. We'll talk about that in a second, and move on. Don't let yourself get stuck for 5 minutes on a single question. Don't, okay? Better to just move on and then come back to it. What you want to do then is, if you stick to this 90 seconds per question, there's 44 questions in the first 2 sections, the multiple choice that's reviewable and the multiple choice that's not. And you'll have about 30 minutes left. If you follow my suggestion at 90 seconds times 44 questions, that is 66 minutes, right? My math is correct. And so 66 minutes out of 90 minutes is about 24 minutes. So that's a good amount of time to have at the end. Then you're going to give yourself that time for review. So you can go back, check the questions. We'll talk about review, like I said. And then you give yourself 10 or 15 minutes for that final case study. My view, the case study is not too complicated. It's more of a reading comprehension exercise. I have some tips for the case study coming up. Oh, well, here's the case study, tip number 3. So my first tip is I don't read the entire case study. I don't think I have read every word on a case study, maybe ever. So what I do is I skip the case study details and I go right to the first question, and I try to figure out from the question, what is it that they need to know? So I would try to determine, okay, here's the question. What facts am I going to need to have in order to answer this question? Then I go back to the case study and I try to find that. So here's an example. The case study might say a bunch of things about migrating an application. And so question number 1 might be, how would you go about implementing the storage requirement in Microsoft Azure? And so you think to yourself, okay, let's go check the storage requirement. Remember, you haven't read it, so you can't answer the question right away. So you go to the case study and you look under storage requirements. They tab them out, and you review all of the storage requirements looking for what the requirements are. Then you flip back to the question and you look at the choices. So you might have a blob storage, a file storage, a hybrid on-premises storage, and a SQL database. And so you've looked at the requirements and you looked at the answers, and you might say, you know what, blob storage is the best answer. You can flip back to the case study one more time, just sort of look at each tab again, make sure there's nothing else about storage, nothing that might jump out at you as being where a database might be a good answer or something like that. And then you move on to question number 2. So case study for me is about finding the answer, not reading the case study and then going to the question. My next tip has to do with marking for review. Now, I use the mark for review button a lot. I don't know what percentage of people use that button, but I use it probably about 20 to 25% of the time. So typically there's going to be things, questions that I see and answers that I came to within those 90 seconds where I would like to see it one more time. And you can't make it every single question. So be selective, but not overly selective. So this is something where I might want to look at it again. I mark for review, I move on. And sometimes you might go and use the MS Learn button to rule some things out or to find out some information that will trigger something in your mind. So you can do that while you're looking at the questions. Really quick 10-15 second search in MS Learn, and then that will get you to an answer quicker. We're really going to use the MS Learn button more during the reviews time. So we've got those 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the exam to review. That's going to be a lot of heavy MS Learn searching. Now, it's just some basic tips for test taking. I think this is rather obvious. Make sure you answer every question. You know there's no penalty for getting a question wrong. And so there's no advantage to leaving anything blank. Actually, the software will actually warn you if you don't answer every question. So that's great. One tip I would give is if you find a question that you're confident in. So in my case, I had a particular question come up where only a few days ago, I was looking at something that told me that answer and it was stuck in my head. I was trying to solve a problem and I was looking for the answer and I found it. And then a couple days later, I take the test and that comes up in a scenario and I know right away because I see the answer. It's exactly what I found. And so within 15 seconds, I was able to answer that question. I don't stick around for the rest of the 90 seconds seeing if I'm sure, if I'm really sure. If you're confident in the answer, click next and get that time back. So now instead of having 90 seconds, I only answered it in, let's say, 30 seconds. That's a whole minute more to do reviews on other questions. Another tip, maybe this is just me because I'm a little bit older. I find myself mumbling or my mouth is moving even if I'm not making a sound. And you can't do that during a certification test. You can't make a sound and your mouth can't be moving. So if that's a thing for you, then make sure your mouth is completely silent and there's no question that you're not cheating. No one will pause the exam or give you a warning or anything around that. The last tip having to do with this is the questions are pretty straightforward. Now, I had a question where I did start to think this would not be true if the following condition was also true. And so I had this contradiction where the answer that I thought might be correct could also possibly be incorrect. But the question didn't say anything about that. And so because it wasn't even mentioned, then I was able to rule out that being a problem. So if the question does not mention anything, you can just assume that what you're thinking should be true is true because it doesn't make sense any other way. And the opposite, of course, you can't assume, oh, well, this must be true and that must be true. If it's material, it needs to be mentioned. If it's not material, it won't be mentioned. It's a very fine line, of course. And the last big tip here has to do with MS Learn. Now, I think this is a good addition to the exam. I endorse it. In my experience, the MS Learn did not help me did not give me the answer to a question. It helped me a lot, but it did not actually allow me to what you might say, quote unquote, cheat. I was not able to find the answer to any single question directly. But what it did let me find is how to rule out other things that could be correct that were actually incorrect. So let me give you an example. So let's say that the question has to do with Azure storage. Just keep on that tune. And you think, okay, well, this potentially could be the answer, but what settings need to be, like, in order for me to use Azure Key Vault, what are the prerequisites for using Azure Storage with customer managed keys and Azure Key Vault? I can go quickly search customer managed keys and Key Vault in MS Learn, see the prerequisites, and then I come back to the question and ensure that all of the prerequisites have been met in order for me to select that as the answer. That was not a question on the exam. I'm not violating my NDA at all. I'm just making that up on the fly, but it basically gives you the prerequisites for something, or the conditions, and then you're able to rule out C and D because they don't meet the prerequisites. Okay. There's no control F on that page. So if you find a page, it might be a long page, and then you have to then parse it with your eyes to find the keywords. So I typically tried to find pages that were concise. I avoided FAQs, frequently asked question pages, because those are typically long and they contain a lot of topics. So, and maybe even tutorial pages sometimes aren't teaching, they're just demonstrating, and that might not be helpful to the exam. So you have to sort of get to know what types of pages are good for answering exam questions. And so maybe you can look at MS Learn in advance and see, based on the title of the page, anything with FAQ in it, anyways, you can probably figure out what the rules are for not using those pages during the exam. So here's a summary of my tips. I'm not going to rehash them, but there's 7 total tips, including the before the exam tip 0. Hope that was helpful. I wish you the best of luck. If you're studying for an exam, I think you're do fine. So good luck to you. And this has been Scott Duffy. I appreciate you being here. Hit the like button if this video was helpful. Subscribe to my channel. And let me know in the comments if you've got additional tips, something you think I should have said, or something you disagree with, or something you agree with. Let me know in the comments, and I'll keep an eye out for that. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.